when you looked in at Greater Manchester, so when they were looking at mapping all the spend within a place, it was identifying not just the spend, but identifying, is that proactive or reactive spend? And I think what we found was that, particularly in, say, in health and social care, you're spending an awful lot on your reactive spend. And if you actually change and manage to put some more of that money into being proactive, you will save over the long term. And I think being able to use data and have that compelling, being able to show that, really does help. And it was quite a powerful case.
Yeah, and often we hear quite a lot of complaints that the data protection is a barrier to this, and particularly in health and social care, children's services, that sort of thing. But is it as much of a barrier as people make it out to be?
I think it's a mixture. This isn't my specialist area, but I think, so data sharing, I think often there's a lot of anxiety about it, sometimes very quite rightly. You know, you need to be careful with this. However, if you find that different services, so that you might find that the police, health, criminal justice, you know, everyone is holding the same data on perhaps the same families, but not sharing this. And actually, if you look across, you may be able to really pinpoint where you need to be targeting and focusing attention, you know, which could really help. I think if you go one stage further than that, and this was just something I've been reading about, is using algorithms to predict. I think it's Chicago, and in America they're starting to use algorithms to predict where potential need may arise. I think that can start to get into quite dangerous territory, but it's quite an interesting thing to consider. I think in the UK we've only just really we're only just scratching the surface of the potential of data, and I think you've talked about some quite interesting ways that we're starting to do it, and I think we can go a lot further.
Deborah, what about you? What have you seen data used to change the way local government is working?
I think we've definitely got smarter in the way that we talk to each other. It's an old saying, but we very much did used to work in silos, and no local authority can afford to do that now. And it's not just within local authorities, it's outside local authorities. It's no longer considered in any way radical to outsource your services, to work with neighbouring authorities, to share services, share, political leaders, chief executives, and that ability and that desire to use data across different service lines and different authority areas has allowed us to do that. If you wanted to keep all your information to yourself, and knowledge was power, we would never have opened our eyes and seen what was out there and how we could work together.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, do we have any questions from the floor?
It's not a question, but it's just something leading on from what you were saying before about data protection. I work for Wigan Council, and one of the things that we're trying to do at the moment is to make sure at the point of data collection we're notifying the data subjects that their information may be used. And we're trying to do that across as many areas as we can. Now, we're not certain yet which ones we can share and use, but it at least starts the ball rolling so that we can then start to look at whether we can or we can't.
Okay, in that case, I've got a question for you. Do many people refuse?
No. It's interesting how you word the statement. It's more of a we will, and then it's up to the data subject to challenge that, but it isn't a sort of open offer to challenge. It's a statement that says we will use your information, and then it's for them to determine whether they do. And no, we're not inundated with people not wanting to share. I'm not sure at that point they are necessarily thinking about what you might be doing with it, but it covers it off from our point of view in terms of starting the process of being able to think about whether you can share.
Okay, I know we're going to do some really interesting things on that side.
I'm Peter Wilson from GMCAT. It's the organisation that's been set up in Greater Manchester to assist with sharing. Just to reply to the thing that's mentioned about Wigan and overall in respect to data protection, if you have a statutory gateway to share the information, then you only have to do the privacy notice and ensure that you comply with the data protection Schedule 2 and Schedule 3 conditions. But I think in a lot of circumstances when you come to like medical information, there is no statutory gateway unless it's a safeguarding issue. Someone's life's at risk, where you can share information, and I think that's where the issue is, where we've got to then look to consent. So if you're in a circumstance like Wigan, where you're saying, we are going to do this with your information, you may not get many objections at all. But then when you actually have to ask people to positively consent to actually using their medical information for research purposes and the like, that's when people get concerned, because the incidences that have happened with like Google and the London Free Hospital, those sorts of things really weaken people's confidence in respect of their medical information being used for research. So the question you then have to ask yourself is, do you need identifiable information to carry out that research? If you don't need identifiable information, then the Data Protection Act doesn't apply. So if you're using anonymised information and you can't identify an individual from the data sets that you've collected, then you can do your research and you don't need the consent, you don't need the privacy notice, and you don't have to jump through as many hoops. Just make people aware that you're carrying out research as standard, which I'm sure we're are doing as part of their privacy notices.
So, lady next to you.
Thank you. Kelly Watson, Hyndburn Borough Council. It's just a comment on the back of those, really, that I think there's a sort of alternative side to it, that the public almost have greater expectation that we're using their data for evidence now. And often it's the case that we don't quite have the access that they expect of us. They want us to know more about them. They want us to be able to work between departments without having to ask permission to carry data through our council. And often it can be quite frustrating for them to see the reality of how data works within our authorities and also between organisations. I know we're getting better at that. And within organisations, there's a greater expectation from us as well. People are anticipating that we're going to use data in a more open way. But it's just to say, really, that I think sometimes the public are ready for us to do more with it than we actually are.
Do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on that, really, that I think you're right. And I think there are other barriers within the public sector, though. For example, use of technology. So I heard a statistic recently, and I can't actually remember it, but of how many health workers who are going out to people's houses who are still writing notes by hand. Now, that means that then that data, if you want to start turning that into usable data, someone has got to go and transcribe that and update it. So you're adding this extra layer. But if everyone was using iPads or something, which it has an upfront cost, but maybe down the line, how much you will save by being able to provide better services for residents by using that data, I think, the cost benefit there would probably be greatly outweighed. But there's things like that I think also need to be addressed.
Okay, one of my favourites is local government won't actually use your council tax bill as a form of identification, so which is always a good one.
Hello, I'm Helen Seasham from Borough Council. I've really enjoyed the presentations and the discussions. Particularly, I'd like to note that I thought the discussion was really about how data can be used to inform strategy. And so my question really is about how can you ensure the accuracy and integrity and quality of data so they don't have false or conflicting conclusions from that data?
Okay. Deborah, do you want to start on that? Thanks, Helen.
No pressure. Well, you would need to put your checks in place. As with any data, you don't take it at face value. You've got double checks in there. You would sense check it. A lot of the data that we're using is extracted from multiple sources, 25 different sources, and that's all cross-referenced against each other. So we're as sure as we can be, but then we go back to the old-fashioned manual check. If something looks a little bit odd, it quite possibly is odd, so you've got to check. You can't possibly eradicate every single, possible potential error, but you can only do your best to try and make sure that you've sense checked it. I don't think we do anything particularly clever in that. We just do, we take the old-fashioned method sometimes. You just check the account.
Do you spot that test?
Yeah, we always do that. Yesterday, for example, we were doing some it's mobile numbers we were checking, but we checked a full 10% sample, and we didn't find a single error in any of that sample. So we were pretty confident that, if we checked 100 out of 1,000 and they're all right, there's not going to be many errors in there.
Okay, Alex, do you want to?
I think, so if you took something like the cost benefit analysis model in Greater Manchester, so that initially took 12 months to be created, and there's a lot of checks and balances in how that's done. There's work with governments, they've got this technical assistance group, and it's constantly learning. So the more primary data that is inputted into it, the more that we are learning about services and value for money. So I think it's about seeing this as an evolutionary process and keeping on, and keeping updating the methodology. And the more data that you have, the more you will learn.
Okay. Any other? We've got a question here.
Thank you. I'm Victoria Bettany from Clares. It was just building on that point really about the way we collect data initially and how that does translate into strategy, and making sure that what we have at the beginning actually fits and works and allows people to build strategies. Talking a lot about business rates today, and the information that we collect from businesses initially, is that enough to start to allow local authorities to plan for the future, to plan for their future businesses, to plan for future investment? I think currently that might not be the case. Everything with business rates feels a little bit reactive as opposed to proactive. It doesn't fit in quite the way that it should do. So moving forward, I think it's important for us to start thinking about the way we collect the data, and the value of that data and how it can be turned into insight, how it can be valuable, and allow local authorities moving forward to plan, which, as you say, is going to become very important when grants start to become rolled into business rates and they have to start to plan for their own finances.
We identified a potential, not a problem, but it's just something that we need to tackle now. With don't wait 2 years. Small business rate relief, it's been great, but it means that people have got really lazy about sharing their information and passing that information on. And again, for a small authority the size of Burnley, I think it's somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of our businesses are in receipt of small business rate relief. So we can't, we're not as confident as we would like to be that we've got all that relevant data that we would need to take those services forward and get the information that we need in future. So we need to start tackling that now, and that might be an old-fashioned writing out, visiting, checking other sources. But there's definitely an issue there around, because we're using historical data to plan for the future, and there's a gap.
Can I ask the business rate appeals, which is such a big issue at the moment, is that partly down to poor data?
Well, that's got to be part of it. That's probably not necessarily the local authority's poor data. We may not have been able to supply additional information to the valuation office, but they probably weren't asking it in that instance. I don't really want to comment on the valuation office, to be fair.
Alex, I think you're exactly right about what's collected, and I think this is a challenge back to local authorities. Are you collecting and asking for things which is what national government is asking you to collect? Or are you asking people things which will help you plan your services and shape your place better going forward? And I think there's a big distinction there. And it's about being proactive, identifying what do you need in terms to help your businesses to grow, and then asking people for that, collecting it and analysing it and acting on it.
Yeah.
Just to add from an information sharing perspective in respect to what Alex has just said, a lot of people that will make those decisions about the relevant information aren't the specialists. So if you are going to do that, you need to get your analytical specialists in to find out what information they need to be able to produce that information, because you may look at it from an operational perspective to deliver something, but then on the back end you've got to evidence and review it, and that's when you need your specialists, just like you said, to be able to say, we will need these other data items in addition. And that's what you've then got to incorporate into any data sharing process as well. So yeah, you do have to make sure you get the specialists involved.
So in addition to specialists, do we need people who are forward-thinking enough to future-proof what they're asking as well?
I would say so. You need people that will understand how they're going to analyse it and what they can produce from it and what they would need to be able to produce a report of substance.
Okay. You have any other questions at the moment?
Hi, Kevin McKay from Liberata. One question for Alex. Any tips around how to get shared investments? Because often I find that, particularly dealing with districts, investments required in one place, but the value is being generated elsewhere. And it's about trying to get a collective investment so we can actually move things forward.
Yeah, I think that is something, again, in Greater Manchester, through the cost-benefit analysis model, you can start to identify where are the benefits accruing. So, and you probably will find that at the moment, it's one service area that's being asked to pay for something. But if you can show and start to map where are the benefits accruing, then you can start to say to people, hang on, guys, if we share paying for this, and to start looking for those new models. So I think you need to start evidencing it and showing it and then start the conversations.
Thank you.
Deborah, do you want to add anything to that?
No.
Okay, I think, any more questions from the floor? Oh, yeah, hello.
Councillor James Grundy from Wigan MBC. Some very interesting discussion this morning. I just thought, there's an obvious danger when it comes to using data to formulate strategy, and it's something that I came across myself when I was a newly elected councillor, that sometimes the data, whilst being true, as it were, can give you a false impression. The example I will give is, we used to collect data in Wigan in terms of poverty, deprivation, issues like that, by something called super output areas. Some of you may be familiar with them. The problem was, and I came across this, I represent an ex-mining village which has also had quite a lot of commuter housing development. There was a particular area I knew had a problem, but all the statistics said there were no problems. Turned out that the poorest part of the village had been aggregated in a super output area with lots of £400,000 houses. So everything came out as above average. And so there's a danger that when you're looking at data to formulate policy, what you've got there is true in a statistical sense, but the facts on the ground bear no relation to what that data is saying. What systems do you put in place to prevent that kind of abstraction from the facts on the ground happening?
Okay, and I think you've just given a prime example why local government trumps central government on working with communities as well.
That's very true. Yes, I think you're really right in what you're saying. I think that's why I purposely tried to use the word evidence, not data. So data feeds into this, but there's a whole, you have to do a lot of analysis. You use a mixture of qualitative and quantitative data and other sources. So it all comes together in the round, and you cannot just rely on one data source, because you're exactly right, you're still going to get some false results. And unless someone knows the area, you may find something that's quite dangerously wrong and then not be responding to that in terms of what residents actually need.
And in terms of when people are actually giving information, I mean, the prime example is people speaking to their doctors about smoking and drinking. Is there a lot of false reporting, do you think?
I don't know, is the honest answer. I can't.
Is there a way to know?
I can say in a personal how I've responded to my doctor before, but I'm not sure that that's really the same as what I would say that everyone else would say.
Well, we won't put you on the spot with that one. Deborah, what about in presumably in revenues and benefits, you do get a lot of false reporting?
It is, and it does come back to that local knowledge. There are times you just instinctively think, no, that isn't how it is out there. And we rely very heavily on that. Actually, members are really useful in that because they do get a different view than officers quite often. And so we do rely on that feedback.
I think we've probably just about dried up from the floor. I'm going to. I know we're still waiting for Andy Burnham, so so I think 3 minutes apparently. So I'm just for the moment. I'm just going to. I'm going to ask you both if there's any final thoughts.
So this isn't actually exactly what I was talking about, but I just think what I said before about the use of data in the UK, I think we can learn so much from elsewhere, from places like the US and how they're doing it. I think things like GM Connect are starting to do some exciting things, and City Verve is the other one in Greater Manchester. But I think there's a big potential in terms of things like open data, opening that up for businesses to then come up with innovative solutions like the City Mapper app that happened in London. So I think it's quite it's quite an exciting time, and there's a lot of opportunities, and we need to kind of ride with this and let it happen.
And I'm probably preaching to the converted at an event like this, because the Revs and Bens officers who've come out to something a little bit different, it's not just Revs and Bens, they're the ones who are already looking outside their services to try and broaden the horizons, broaden the knowledge base. But that's what we need to do. We need to think much bigger than Revs and Bens.
Okay. Well, I'm going to, rather unusually for a live conference, I'm going to draw to a close there, because I think we probably exhausted you both on that kind of thing. So, I'm going to say, if anyone wants to grab a quick coffee before the next session, then do so now. Thank you.